professional actors, you go in and just jump in and do it, best of your ability.
Let me say, can I say one thing? Please. To me, the great Stanley Kubrick was an actor's enemy. And I can point to movies that he's done, the worst performances I've...
Hollywood is full of rivalries, but few burned as intensely, or as quietly, as the one between Robert Duvall and another legendary actor who shared the screen with him. On camera, they were perfect partners, delivering unforgettable performances that made movie history. But behind the scenes, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Robert Duvall, known for his powerful, no-nonsense performances in The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, and Tender Mercies, has always been one of Hollywood's most respected figures. He's not a man of gossip or public drama, which makes his lifelong resentment toward one particular co-star all the more shocking. For years, fans have speculated, insiders have whispered, and interviews have hinted at the truth. Duvall's hatred wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal. He wasn't one to hold grudges lightly. Those who worked with him described Duvall as a perfectionist, passionate, blunt, and fiercely protective of his craft. And when someone violated his sense of integrity or respect, he never forgot it. The feud began on a legendary film set, one that shaped American cinema forever. But what started as creative tension slowly turned into decades of bitterness, silence, and mutual disdain, even as awards were won and careers soared. Duvall could never forgive what happened during those grueling months of filming. Today, decades later, the truth about what drove Robert Duvall to truly hate one man more than anyone else in Hollywood is finally being revealed. And it's more personal, raw, and heartbreaking than anyone imagined. Before Robert Duvall became one of the most revered actors in Hollywood, he was a man obsessed with authenticity. Born in San Diego, California in 1931, Duvall's path to stardom was anything but glamorous. The son of a U.S. Navy admiral, he grew up in a disciplined household where hard work and honesty were non-negotiable. That foundation shaped his approach to acting. He didn't believe in pretense, ego, or showmanship. For Duvall, acting wasn't about fame, it was about truth. When he broke into Hollywood in the early 1960s, Duvall's talent was undeniable. His early performances in To Kill a Mockingbird and True Grit showcased a raw intensity that few actors could match. He didn't play characters, but he became them. Every gesture, every pause, every look had meaning. Directors loved him for it, but some co-stars found him intimidating. Duvall demanded the same level of commitment from everyone around him, and when they didn't measure up, he didn't hide his frustration. By the early 1970s, Duvall's reputation had reached new heights when he joined Francis Ford Coppola's groundbreaking masterpiece, The Godfather. It was here that he crossed paths with the man who would become the center of one of Hollywood's most infamous behind-the-scenes feuds, Al Pacino. At first, there was mutual respect. Both were passionate craftsmen, both coming from the method acting tradition, and both determined to deliver performances that would stand the test of time. But as filming continued, cracks began to show. Duvall, already an established actor, felt that Pacino's growing fame and ego were changing the atmosphere on set. Meanwhile, Pacino believed that Duvall was too rigid, too controlling, and unwilling to adapt to his style. The tension reached its peak when discussions about pay began for The Godfather Part 2. While Marlon Brando and Al Pacino were offered massive raises, Duvall was paid significantly less despite his critical role as Tom Hagen, the Corleone family's loyal consigliere. Feeling slighted and disrespected, Duvall refused to return for The Godfather Part 3, famously saying, "If they paid Pacino double what I got, it was insulting. I told them to forget it. But money wasn't the real issue. It was respect." Duvall had dedicated himself fully to the franchise, helping shape its emotional core. Yet he felt Hollywood's obsession with celebrity had overshadowed integrity. To him, Pacino's rise symbolized everything wrong with the industry: vanity, favoritism, and a lack of gratitude for the ensemble that made the films legendary. That wound never healed. Even decades later, Duvall made subtle but sharp remarks in interviews, describing Pacino's later performances as over-the-top and a caricature. He once said, "You don't have to scream and shout to be powerful. a comment widely interpreted as a dig at Pacino's acting style. Behind those words was more than professional critique. It was hurt. Duvall had always valued loyalty, both on and off the screen. When that loyalty was broken, forgiveness didn't come easily. Over the years, Hollywood moved on. The feud became a whisper, then a myth, then a footnote in film history. But for Robert Duvall, the memory of that betrayal remained. He never looked back with regret about walking away from The Godfather Part 3. Instead, he wore it like a badge of honor, proof that integrity meant more than a paycheck. In a town built on pretense and compromise, Robert Duvall stood firm as one of the few who refused to play the Hollywood game. But that strength came with a cost, and as the years went by, the feud that began on one of cinema's most celebrated sets would continue to haunt both men in unexpected ways. On the surface, Robert Duvall appeared to be the kind of actor who kept his emotions in check, a man defined by discipline, authenticity, and a deep respect for the art of acting. But during the height of his career, there was one figure who could ignite a fire in him like no other: Marlon Brando. Their relationship began with admiration, but quickly turned into one of the most infamous feuds in Hollywood history, marked by clashing egos and vastly different approaches to performance. When Duvall first met Brando on the set of The Godfather in 1971, he was in awe. Brando was already a legend, a man whose performances in A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront had transformed modern acting. For Duvall, working alongside such a titan seemed like the ultimate honor. But what he didn't anticipate was how Brando's eccentricities and lack of discipline would test his patience beyond measure. From the very beginning, Brando's unpredictable behavior on set drove Duvall mad. Brando, known for his method acting, often showed up late, refused to memorize lines, and would sometimes deliberately throw his co-stars off during emotional scenes. Duvall, by contrast, believed in precision, preparation, and a professional work ethic. Watching Brando improvise or make up dialogue on the spot wasn't just annoying to him, it felt disrespectful to the craft itself. According to several crew members, tensions between the two actors simmered quietly throughout filming, occasionally boiling over during key scenes. Duvall once reportedly told director Francis Ford Coppola, "If Brando's going to do his own movie, then let him direct it." Brando, in turn, dismissed Duvall as too uptight and accused him of taking acting too seriously. These jabs, though subtle, revealed the deep divide between their philosophies. The most infamous confrontation came during the filming of Don Vito Corleone's death scene. Brando's decision to ad-lib, combined with his playful antics, left Duvall visibly frustrated. In interviews years later, Duvall didn't hold back his disdain, calling Brando lazy and self-indulgent. He respected Brando's natural talent but despised his lack of commitment, saying when he was good, he was brilliant, but most of the time he was just wasting it. What made their feud even more interesting was that both men were, in many ways, mirrors of each other, perfectionists with a burning desire to dominate the screen. Yet where Brando embraced chaos, Duvall demanded control. Their on-set rivalry pushed both men to deliver unforgettable performances, but it also left lasting scars. Even years after The Godfather was completed, Duvall would still mention Brando with a tone of lingering frustration. The tension reached a new peak during the Academy Awards when The Godfather swept the nominations. Duvall was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, but Brando famously refused his Best Actor Oscar, sending a Native American activist to reject it on his behalf. For Duvall, this wasn't a noble political statement. It was another example of Brando's arrogance. He later told reporters that Brando's stunt turned the ceremony into a circus. Behind the scenes, mutual respect quietly coexisted with contempt. Duvall never denied Brando's influence on acting, but he saw him as a cautionary tale, a man who let his genius turn into self-destruction. Brando, for his part, seemed amused by Duvall's seriousness, once joking that Duvall acted like he was saving the world. Their feud became a symbol of a larger debate in Hollywood, the conflict between raw, instinctual artistry and disciplined, methodical performance. For Duvall, Brando represented everything he vowed never to become. And for Brando, Duvall embodied the rigidity he spent his career rebelling against. Decades later, when asked if he ever made peace with Brando before the latter's death in 2004, Duvall simply said, "No need. We were two bulls in the same pasture. We respected each other, but we were never meant to get along." That simple statement summed up their complicated bond, one forged in rivalry, pride, and passion for the same art. It wasn't just hate. It was an unspoken acknowledgement that greatness often breeds conflict. When filming wrapped on The Godfather, the world saw Robert Duvall and Al Pacino as brothers in arms, two towering talents who had helped define an era of cinema. But behind the curtain, a rift had already begun to form, one that would quietly grow into one of Hollywood's most painful divides. The trouble deepened when The Godfather Part II entered production. Duvall was excited to reprise his role as Tom Hagen, the loyal consigliere who anchored the Corleone family, with intelligence and restraint, but his excitement turned to disbelief when he learned about the pay scale. Pacino was offered an enormous raise, befitting his newfound stardom, while Duvall's offer was a fraction of that. Duvall didn't mince words about how that made him feel. "It wasn't about greed," he once said. "It was about respect. If they paid Pacino twice as much, fine, but not 3 or 4 times. For a man who had always valued fairness and integrity over fame, this felt like a betrayal. He saw it not only as an insult to his talent, but as a sign that Hollywood had chosen its favorite son. When the studio refused to budge, Duvall walked away from The Godfather Part II. It was a bold move, one that stunned everyone involved. His departure forced a major rewrite of the script, and his absence left a hole in the story. But Duvall never looked back. He believed he'd done what was right, even if it meant losing his place in one of the most celebrated film franchises in history. For Al Pacino, however, the decision cut deep. While he never publicly criticized Duvall, those close to both men said the tension was palpable. Pacino felt Duvall had abandoned the project and, by extension, him. Duvall, on the other hand, felt that Pacino, his longtime friend, could have spoken up in his defense, but didn't. From that point on, the two legends rarely spoke. They appeared cordial at industry events, but never rekindled their earlier camaraderie. When asked about Pacino years later, Duvall's voice carried a mixture of respect and sadness. "He's a great actor," he said. "But sometimes great actors forget where they came from." For Duvall, it wasn't just about money or fame. It was about loyalty, principle, and the belief that true friendship shouldn't change under the glare of success. But Hollywood had its own rules, and Duvall had never been one to play by them. In the years that followed, both men continued to build remarkable careers. Yet, the quiet tension between them never truly disappeared. It lingered, a shadow that even time couldn't erase. And for Robert Duvall, that silence became a painful reminder of how fragile loyalty could be in a world built on image and illusion. As Robert Duvall entered his later years, he began to reflect more deeply on the choices that had shaped his life, both personal and professional. The fierce independence that had guided his career, the stubborn pride that had made him walk away from The Godfather Part II, and the long-standing silence with Al Pacino were all parts of a legacy that was as complex as it was brilliant. In interviews, Duvall was often asked about his feuds with directors, producers, and fellow actors. But when Pacino's name came up, his tone always softened. "I don't hate Al," he said once quietly. "I just wish things had been different." That simple statement revealed more than years of speculation ever could. It was not hatred that lingered in Duvall's heart. It was disappointment. A sadness born from a friendship that had once been genuine, but had fractured under the weight of fame and ego. Over time, the bitterness faded into quiet acceptance. Duvall never apologized for standing by his principles, and Pacino never apologized for his success. Yet there was an unspoken understanding between them that they had once shared something rare in Hollywood: mutual respect. In a later interview, Pacino called Duvall one of the best actors I've ever worked with, a comment that surprised many fans. When told about it, Duvall simply nodded and smiled, saying, "That's good of him to say." Despite the past, both men remained giants of their craft. Duvall's later films, Tender Mercies, The Apostle, Open Range, showed the depth of his artistry and the power of restraint he'd always been known for. Awards and accolades followed, but Duvall never seemed to chase them. What mattered most to him was the work, the truth of every character he brought to life. In his final reflections, Duvall often spoke about the price of integrity in a business built on compromise. "You have to live with your choices," he said. "If you sell out once, you'll keep selling out." It was a philosophy that defined him, the belief that respect, once lost, could never be fully regained, and yet, even with all his strength and conviction, there was still a trace of sorrow when he looked back on the people he had lost along the way. The industry had changed, the friendships had faded, but his commitment to authenticity never wavered. To those who knew him best, Robert Duvall wasn't bitter. He was simply honest. In the end, his legacy wasn't shaped by who he fought with or who he forgave, but by the characters he immortalized, men of principle, flawed yet dignified, strong yet human. His life was proof that even in a world obsessed with fame and fortune, integrity still had a place, and perhaps, somewhere deep down, he hoped that if Al Pacino ever looked back too, he'd remember not the feud, but the friendship, the laughter, the late-night rehearsals, and the magic they created together on screen. For behind every story of rivalry lies a moment of connection that once mattered, and for Robert Duvall, that was something worth remembering, even to the very end.